What's up, everyone? Welcome to Normal America Show. I got my hat today. You have to see my bald head. Hope you're all having a great day. I am. I had a great night's sleep. Fun stream last night. Looking to jump back in this morning. So thanks so much for you all being here. Enjoying the emojis. I see Black Jaden. Woke Andrew Wilson. That bastard. It's great to be here. Stop swearing so much, Rob. Come on. They were working on the water lines up the road there a couple weeks ago. My water, I like to drink tap water. My water was tasting a little of dirt, but I think it's better now. So I think, yeah, I drank a little dirt, I think. Maybe that explains my stupidity, huh? Trump supporter admits that he drinks dirt. There we go. We need more fluoride here in Western Pennsylvania. No, it was a good show last night. I enjoyed it. I'm happy to be here again this morning. Haven't done a short yet today. I'll do shorts later in the day. So I actually dabbled with, do I want to do the call-in shows Friday morning? I like the idea of doing an early show. I do, because especially on Fridays, it's nice to then have Friday, and then if I don't work Saturday, or even if I do and I go in halfway through the day Saturday, then I get Friday night to hang out with my family and do what I want. So I like the idea. The problem is I only get like 1/5 of the audience if I do Friday morning. So I was doing these Friday morning call-in shows, and then I decided, whatever. We'll just do them at the same time I do all my other shows. But it's not an option tonight because I've been informed we're going over to some family member's house to do some Christmas stuff, making Christmas cookies and things of that nature. So it's going to be an all-day extravaganza for me. So, that's right, God Save an Ant. There are like only 12 watching. That's exactly what I'm saying. So we'll see. We'll give people a chance to come in, but we'll do a call-in show. Now, one of the things that's interesting about these Friday call-in shows is oftentimes I get people from other time zones. So I was getting people from Australia to call in, people from Europe to call in. So it's interesting when you do different, time zone or different times, how you get a different type of audience. I sound psyched. I am actually excited. Believe it or not, I enjoy hanging out with my family. So I ain't going to be making no damn cookies. I'll tell you that. I'll be eating cookies, but I ain't making them. So I'm probably going to take my phone and I'll do a couple short videos while I'm there. And other than that, I'll just hang out and BS to people, and it should be fun. Hang out with the Hank Man. Should be a good time. I'm looking forward to it. So, unable to connect. What's going on with Rumble? Am I streaming on Rumble right now? I'm going to be bummed if I'm not. It says it didn't connect. Well, that's a bummer. Oh, well. Well, I'm not on Rumble today. Oh, well. So, we're going to open up the lines to take calls. People could talk about basically whatever they want, which I'll regret saying. That probably means I'll be talking to people that want to make sure women can't vote or exterminate people of certain sexual orientations or cheer for the murders of healthcare CEOs. But that's the jungle we play in. I probably didn't, Sparky. That's probably what happened. I didn't refresh the streamer key. Si se puede. I don't speak Pig Latin or whatever that is. Rob, is there anything you could tangibly think of that would change your mind about Trump? Not some abstract thing, but like something related to inflation or foreign policy or anything. Well, what is your impression of what I think about Trump? There's a ton of things. I constantly change what I think about Trump. Is your question that would cause me to go from being a net Trump supporter to a net Trump decrier? Is that what you mean by that? Because I've criticized all sorts of things Trump's done in his first term and even in his candidacy for the second term. Yeah, let me give you an example. If Trump decides we're going to invade Iran, if Trump decides we're going to preemptively bomb Russia, if Trump decides that we're going to actively censor, continue through the censorship policies that we've seen with the Biden administration. If Trump decides that he's going to lock up more January 6 people. Definition of insurrection. Why not? Thank you, Pandemic Slayer. Yeah, that's generous of you. So yeah, there's all sorts of things. And you could say whether or not Trump may have foreign policy decisions that lead to worse foreign policy outcomes. Yep, that could be true. I think that's partially what happened in Syria. His bombing of Syria was terrible. I think he was probably too antagonistic to Russia with some of his policies. So yeah, there's all sorts of things that I could say. Now, the question is, I'm not, even though I'll joke and say I'm a Trump supporter, which I am, that's not at core who I am. I am someone who understands that the biggest problem in this country are unelected bureaucrats and institutions that really run the show. So when Trump failed to drain the swamp, that was a huge criticism of him. But what am I comparing him to? What would a Kamala Harris administration look like? Do you think it would have entrenched those powers even more than Trump will? Probably. So there's all sorts of room to criticize Trump in his first term. I did it mightily. I'll do it again. He ain't going to drain the swamp. Not totally. I'm more optimistic this time than last time, but I'd still only put it at a 15 to 20% chance that he does things that have lasting effect on it. Do I think Kash will get confirmed? It's interesting. They're going to try to block him. That's absolutely true. And the real problem is going to be the Mitch McConnell type people on the Republican side. They'll have one or two Republicans that'll try to throw a wrench in it. The problem is, are they too fearful that Trump has enough of a mandate within the Republican Party that he'll just do recess appointments or something like that? Maybe. So I think ultimately Kash will be there. It's going to be a tough fight, though, but that's my guess. But once he's there, will he be hamstrung? We'll see. All right, so let's put the... Gosh, what's that? Let's put the link out there to the Discord. And within reason, as long as it doesn't violate terms of service, we'll talk about what... Anything you want to disagree with me, you want to agree with me, whatever. You have a bone to pick with something I said. I know what this ends up with. I do. I know that this ends up with people on... It's always... I'd love to argue with people on the left, but they know to avoid me at this point. So it's always people on the right that want to call and tell me I'm a bad Christian or something like that. But that's okay. What are some things that we could talk about while we're waiting for people to call in? One second. Okay. Good. Yeah, I agree with Pentuple there, Chris. If it is not about Republicans versus Democrats, the biggest threat to sort of Trump's agenda is Republicans that are pro-establishment Republicans. They would, the Mitch McConnells, the Romneys, the Paul Ryans of the world, they all wanted Hillary Clinton to beat Trump in 2016. They wanted Biden to beat Trump in 2020. They wanted Kamala to beat Trump in 2024. They will be there. Is if they think they can get away with it, they will sabotage Trump's agenda at every given moment, because what Trump's agenda at its core stands for is sort of populism and stopping the entrenchment of power in these bureaucracies. That entrenchment of power benefits Mitch McConnell. It benefits Paul Ryan. It benefits Romney. It benefited Jeff Flake. It benefited McCain. They don't want that taken out. Lindsey Graham. They don't want that taken out. But they also understand that in order to keep their seat of power, they can't aggravate the MAGA voters that bad. So they have to, at least at face value, go along with the agenda. That's why they'll coordinate and make sure it's just, if they only need 1 or 2 votes to prevent someone from being confirmed, they'll make sure that there's just 1 or 2 votes. That's what they'll do. Do I think the current immigration system needs to be changed? Yes, we basically need to stop all immigration immediately. It needs to be changed. And kick out the illegals that are here. Yep. The rest of your question, I'm not very interested in Cloak of Shadows. We should have an immigration system that prioritizes merit, but a precursor to any of that is stopping the mass influx of illegals that are already here. So I'm uninterested anymore in talking about, well, here's how we need to make it easier for people to come in. I don't give a shit about that anymore. I don't. If your house gets robbed every day and the cops just sit there smoking cigarettes and go, oh, that's a shame. Am I interested in you saying, well, what are some policies we could have for the people that are forced to rob your house? Can we think of changes so that the policies, how about we lock those people up? How about that? Let's start with that. Then down the road, we could talk about the change of other policies. But what ends up happening, this is continually what happens. And I'm not saying you're bad faith about this, Cloaked Shadows, but this is what happens, right? Well, let's take dreamers, right? People that as children were brought to this country who've never really, as an adult, known another country. Should they be kicked out through no fault of their own? Probably not. They shouldn't be. That doesn't mean they should be made citizens, but I don't know that they didn't do anything themselves, so it seems difficult to punish them. Their parents, boot them out if they're here illegally. See ya. But them, yeah, I could see the case. So it's like, well, what can we do for those people? Here's how this works out. The people that are more than happy with the broken immigration system and the mass influx of illegals, they'll say, well, we'll work on border security simultaneously with the Dreamers. Or we need to work on DACA and the Dreamers first. We need to do that first. And then we can talk about border security. And then what happens is perpetually we say, okay, these people are allowed here. These people, we'll fix something with them. And then we'll get to border security and people go, nah, let's leave more people in. Then we'll talk about border security. And I'm sick and tired. Like when I debated that, I forget his name, but Grayson, what did he say? It's a human right for everyone to be here. We should ignore, even today, the courts that have given orders to deport people. We should ignore that because it's our fault for having a system that's too difficult for people to migrate here legally. Nope, don't give a shit about that. I don't mind legal immigration. I really don't. I think there's a place for it. It should be based on merit. But I'm uninterested in talking about it right now. It's irrelevant. It's a hostage-like situation. Well, you know, we've supported basically the Democrats' policies, but isn't it kind of because it's too hard? Our system's too broken to come here legally? What are we going to do about that? Yeah, no. No thanks. Not interested in the conversation. That's right, Pentuple. The Democrats wanted this. That's exactly right. So did many establishment Republicans. They like the cheap labor, too. It is all about eroding national identity. It is not a Republican versus Democrat thing. It is an establishment versus those outside the establishment thing. They want a globalist agenda. That's what they want. They want an erosion of national borders. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to have unfettered migration. Everyone deserves to be wherever they want. Cool. Then you don't have to worry about pesky things like people being attached to the Bill of Rights, having attachments to their country of origin and civic pride and national pride. All right, we got some people. Oh, there's okay. So we'll bring some folks in. One more time, I'll put the link out there. Now, couple things as we're taking callers to take note of. You have to keep it within terms of service. That's number one. Number two, this is a new addendum. It is my show, so if I feel like rambling on and on, it's my show. If you don't like that situation, we could set up a show that's specifically a debate. Me versus you or whoever the one person would be. And I'll put a timer up and we could each have equal time to talk. But in a call-in show, it's a little different. So that's number two. And number three is I can't guarantee that I'll talk to everyone for the same amount of time. So like, for example, there's 2 people in the queue right now. I have a 2-hour show. I have to be done by 12:30. If I talk to the first person for 20 minutes because there's only one other person there, and then 7 people jump in the call log, I'm probably only going to have like 5-10 minutes with each person. So, but let's begin. All right, first we got Leader. What's up? Of playing poker fame.
How are you doing?
Doing good. How are you doing today?
What I was, I heard your. I'm sorry. I've just come back from the bar with a few boys, and I was listening to your show, and I heard you talk about Russia, and you mentioned that you think that Trump should have been less harsh on Russia.
Yes.
My opinion is the exact. I couldn't be further from yours. So I was wondering, could you expand on what on that particular opinion?
Sure. Well, let's start with analyzing. Do you think Trump was harder on Russia than the presidents came before him, such as Obama?
Yes.
He certainly was. So we could agree on that, right? I think that we should have been pursuing diplomatic negotiations with Russia, China, North Korea, all of these hostile places, more than setting up intentional antagonistic situations. So certainly I don't mind some of the economic posturing. For example, the harshest thing that Trump did that really affected Russia was probably increasing energy exports and trying to make Europe more of an energy ally with the United States rather than Russia. Because one of Russia's biggest, the ways that they kind of continue their position in the world stage is their energy exports, particularly to Europe, that basically relies on them. So I think that one of the best ways to tackle Russia in a non-militaristic way is to actually increase U.S. energy exports. Now, obviously, there's a difficulty with a big ocean in the way, but you get the drift. So I think that was okay. And some of the things I didn't really mind were like, the posturing with Russia, like when it comes to different economic situations they had, maybe, I didn't think it was a huge deal to kick out certain Russian diplomats, etc. Those things are fine. The 2 things in particular, I think, that I question were too harsh on Russia was one, the bombing of Syria, which was an ally of Russia. I thought the way that bombing occurred was absurd, particularly when you looked at the details of it. And we bombed 3 days after an alleged gas attack, which whistleblowers from the IPCW that were on the ground still say that there wasn't proof that in that particular attack that Assad ordered it. They don't even have proof that the attack actually happened. So the fact that we're bombing 3 days afterwards, there's no way that the U.S. intel agencies had proof that Assad was doing that. And so this was clearly an antagonistic to Assad, which I don't give a shit. I don't like Assad or Putin, but it was certainly antagonistic to Russia as well, which I think helps escalate tensions. And then the other thing was the actual sending of things like Javelin missiles and weapons to Ukraine, which I think further signaled to Russia that there was an aggressive stance and posture by the United States and the West, which doesn't excuse their invasion. I still think Russia's wrong to invade, but instead of trying to pursue sort of more diplomatic approaches, it seemed that we continued to escalate the military confrontations, which then predictably leads to Russia inevitably invading and gets us in the situation we're into now.
Do you think it's possible that I consider I'm no fan of Trump, right? But I can recognize when he does some great, in my opinion, some really great moves. Him talking down to the Europeans about, their import of gas prices before the invasion of Ukraine was that is a beautiful clip. And I love that. They shouldn't have been buying that amount of gas. They were just, they essentially funded the Russian war chest. But in terms of delivering weapons to Ukraine, do you not think that the Russian decision to go into Ukraine could have been like an entirely Russian-based decision,
Sure.
based on things that were happening in Russia at the time, and not so much as the US.
Sure.
Because in my opinion, I think that Russia was losing control of Ukraine because of the protests and
The
the
protests that
Maidan.
were basically pushed for by NGOs that were paid by the U.S. government, Intel, and USAID. Yeah.
I mean, like you say that, but I mean, like that wasn't the be all. I'm not entirely sure about the effect that has when like the Ukrainians were incredibly upset at the decision to not to sort of postpone going into the European Union. And I mean, like it's not hard for anyone to see that they don't sort of like they wanted to take Ukraine from the European Union, and then they said they wanted to join the Russian bloc, which is like Kazakhstan, Russia,
Who said that?
Belarus.
Poroshenko said this?
No,
And his
that was what's going on at the time. I'm pretty sure. Well, it was the not Poroshenko. It was
in
the leader of that
2014.
time.
Oh, I'm sorry, Yanukovych.
Yanukovych, yes,
Yeah.
that was the one. So that was the plan. And from my understanding is that that block of countries has incredibly poor economic outcomes. Like, it's
So,
the
so here's what I would say about this. It is certainly true that let's start with Ukraine and then we'll branch out. It is certainly true that there were probably millions of people in Ukraine that were pissed off about the current administration. You could say the same in the United States. You could say the same in the UK. You could say the same about Australia and literally any other country in the world. Now, your mileage may vary. There's certainly going to be countries where more people are more pissed off than other countries, but that's certainly true. Anytime we see a country that has economic problems, sort of strife that's going on within the country, that's not a first world country like the United States or UK. The truth of the matter is, there will always be people there that would be happy to upset the apple cart and change the current administration. The question is, are they able to do so? Right? You could see if you look at sort of what the United States sort of color revolution strategy that they've had going on, they selectively pick countries that they know there's internal strife that they think will benefit the West if we have a change of leadership. Then they foster sort of free speech and democracy in those countries. And the truth is, yeah, that helps overthrow the country because there's a lot of people that are pissed off. The same is true in the United States. The same is true in the UK. If you want to change the leadership of a country, free speech really helps do that because in a lot of countries, people don't like the leadership. And so what happens is the United States pushes through these NGOs all of these policies that encourage things like free speech and encourage dissidents and things like that. And those people exist. I'm not denying that. Of course, there were millions of people in Ukraine that were pissed about the situation. There's millions of people right now in Ukraine that are pissed about Zelensky, I'm sure. But the difference is because powerful institutions of the West are backing one side or the other, it makes that side more likely to achieve success than they would have elsewise. And so, unfortunately for the people of Ukraine, they've, since the fall of the Soviet Union, perpetually been locked in a situation where they don't really get to vote for leadership of their country. They get a puppet of Putin or a puppet of Obama. That's what their choices will be. They'll get a puppet that's just a vassal state of Russia or a puppet that's a vassal state of the United States. And I feel terrible for the people of the Ukraine for that. So, yes, while it's true there was organic people within Ukraine that were probably really pissed off about Yanukovych, the truth is the United States helped facilitate that revolution, and it ended up, and Russia is pissed off about that. They don't like the fact that their neighbor that was one of their biggest allies now became an ally and a vassal state of their biggest enemy. So I think that sort of situation, and then the constant provocations, the biolabs that are on the border of Russia with just 100 miles off, the bombing of Syria and the permanent stationing of bases in Syria, the constant talks of expanding NATO, the sending Ukraine military things like Javelin missiles, etc. I think all of that helped provoke Russia, and instead a posture of trying to work with Russia diplomatically may have been better. Now, would my plan led to failure? Could be. Could it be that Russia's just the orcs from Tolkien and they're just evil people and will invade no matter what? Could be. But I think it's a mistake to pursue aggressive military posturing when there was diplomatic options left on the table.
So I think you're characterization of like the ground forces in Ukraine is not quite accurate. My understanding is that Ukraine is sort of Ukraine is a democratic country, or it was, and it sort of was stuck. It was like highly corrupt, and it was essentially in like a rotating sort of power between like factions of like oligarchs that sort of existed in Ukraine. And these like factions of oligarchs, they would make deals on the side to sort of help them get into power. Now, my understanding is that one of these oligarchs, one of these oligarch groups, sort of like was it turned out in the last election, made some promises to Putin to like get him into the election, and the other guy decided for a more populist sort of route and went for the EU choice. So it's not like like the idea that like Russia wanted to sort of invade Ukraine because of the US, I don't think is quite accurate, because it's really
Why did they
sort of
invade? You tell me why you think they invaded.
They invaded, I would say, out of a sense of like paranoia. I think that what you've described with your with what sort of like, that the US is like funding these like groups, I think that sort of like talk probably got into amongst the Kremlin, and then they sort of were worried that the Ukraine would join the EU, and once they're in the EU, they'd be forever lost, because there is a defensive article in the EU that nations should come to the defense of other nations. So once Ukraine joined the European Union, that's it. Like,
okay.
Russia can't like militarily.
So you've given basically two reasons why Russia invaded. The first was because they were paranoid that the U.S. was funding things there. What if the U.S. was funding things there?
I mean, it's possible that they were. I would say, yeah, it's possible, but I would still.
Well, they were. We know they were, but nonetheless, like. So when I say, like, I'm not excusing Russia's invasion. Don't get me wrong. I wish Ukraine would win today, and Russia would go home with their tails between their legs, and they would vote out Vladimir Putin, and we would get a leader that's less likely to be militaristic. That's my hope, right? But, right, when I say I think that there were aggressive stances that the United States and the West took that could have helped lead to the outcome that we have. It doesn't excuse what Putin and Russia did, but it helped drive things sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And you're like, no, I disagree. Russia invaded for other reasons. And I'm like, what? And both of the reasons you get are actions taken by the West, right? The first is, well, they were paranoid because of funding from like the US. Well, that funding existed. They had rights to be paranoid, right? And I'll go through that. The second that you give is because they were afraid that Ukraine would join the EU. Right, that's sort of the argument that I'm making. Russia looked at Ukraine as a former country that was part of them in the Soviet Union, and they looked at them as a great ally. That's how they looked at Ukraine, right? Now I'm not saying that's good for the people of Ukraine. I'm not saying that, but that's that's from the perspective. Go ahead.
I wouldn't say great ally. No, I think I would say that Putin, like, has in multiple stances come out and said Ukraine is just basically not a state.
That's fine. Let me rephrase saying great ally. They failed it. They viewed it as a country that was supportive of Russia and had strategic import to Russia. Is that better than saying ally?
If you want to phrase it like that, that's perfect.
Okay. So Russia looked at it like that, and you would admit that was correct. You would think that the Yanukovych regime, you already said that they were in the economic bloc with Russia, and the people wanted to go to the EU. Right? You've admitted that.
No, they weren't in it, but they wanted. That was sort of like the guy in power wanted to sort of join the...
Right. So Russia's like, oh boy, this is really good for us. And then Russia's greatest enemy is NATO and the United States, a military alliance that exists for the sole purpose of defeating Russia. Right? So so they're worried that NATO is going to expand, that these European countries that they are in conflict with is going to start getting closer and closer to the border of Russia. Right? And so then what happens is, yes, there is a bunch of foreign investment, NGO money, aid money, etc. that's going into Ukraine that oust the president that they liked, Yanukovych, and installed a president in Poroshenko who literally became a vassal state of Obama. Like, for example, the entire creation of basically the equivalent of the FBI in Ukraine, the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, the NABU, was financed by the Obama State Department, right? And The Obama State Department, even though it was denied, we actually see records of this, they were basically instructing the NABU who they could investigate. When they started to investigate a group called the Anti-Corruption Action Center that was also funded by USAID and NGOs and the State Department and by George Soros organizations, George Kent from the State Department sends a letter to those prosecutors saying, don't look into them. We think that would be very bad. Right? So these sorts of things were occurring. So Russia goes from a state that reliably was basically a vassal of theirs to now being a vassal of their greatest enemy. And they're like, oh, we want to join the EU. And once we join the EU, then we'll be basically entangled in a military alliance, which means Russia can never do shit with us. So it looked to Russia like, well, time's running out. Then all of a sudden you get weapons that are being sent. Then you get the United States that's bombing Syria, putting permanent bases in Syria that are closer to Ukraine. Then you get the United States that are operating these biolabs. We see this massive pandemic. We see the United States lied. U.S. agencies lied about the creation of the pandemic that they partially helped fund in this lab in Wuhan. All of this seems to be reasons that even you're suggesting that the reason Russia invaded was their paranoia because they thought they were going to lose Ukraine and it was going to be part of the West.
Right. But when I say like the EU, you don't consider the EU to be like a NATO bloc, right? It's not like the EU isn't exclusively NATO members. It is like, I would say it's true. Like 95% like an economic bloc. Do you think it's possible that Ukraine came to like this decision, like the Ukrainian people thought that, the EU provided like better economic opportunities for them, rather than the Russian
but you've already belied your own argument. Didn't you start off by saying, well, once they join the EU, then it would be off limits because there would be basically a militaristic alliance?
When I say off limits, I think there is I'm not too certain, but I've heard it being said that there is a defensive article in the EU.
Regardless, don't you think that even if we can't point to that specific article, don't you think Russia would look at it like, well, if Ukraine becomes an EU member state, if we were to invade, then that would basically be tantamount to an act of war against the entire EU?
I mean, potentially, but it's still like the framing that like Russia was like ingressed upon by the West, and that's why they attacked Ukraine.
But that's your argument. That's your argument. You didn't say your argument was the reason Russia invaded was two things. One, they were worried that Ukraine would join the EU, and second, they did have paranoia that the U.S. and presumably but Western countries were financing sort of revolutions and things like that within Ukraine.
Right, but I did say paranoia, right? So like just because like the West may have had a hand in like supporting the Maidan revolution, and I'm not too certain to what extent that happened, so I'm just taking your word that this was the case. But say that was the case, right? I still think that like the idea that the next step is invasion sort of like speaks to like there was like Putin had plans to take over this region before that. Before any of this happened, it was like we need to invade now so that we can in the future invade them. This isn't like there's like 1,000 other different ways they could have gained influence in Ukraine. They could have waited till the next election. They could have used their like vast sums of money to like essentially buy out Ukraine and made sure that they didn't have to sort of opt for we'll invade now and take Crimea and use that as like a stepping stone to keep
this is what's really going on. Ukraine sits on a bunch of energy resources, and the United States and the West know that if Ukraine would become trading partners with the United States, they could possibly open up European markets to those resources, which would cut necessarily Russia out of that, which would mean Russia would lose influence. None of this justifies Russia invading. Let me be clear. You're sort of phrasing it as like, oh, I'm saying that Russia are these noble people that had no choice but to invade because of the positions of the United States. That's not what I'm saying.
I didn't quite want to phrase it like that, but please.
Okay.
I didn't want to characterize you that badly.
Right. Well, what I'm saying is, it's similar to this, right? Let's take the official narrative of 9/11. That Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden trained these fighters to come and attack the United States. When Ron Paul says, look, we're meddling in the Middle East, we're creating terrorists because of the disastrous Middle Eastern policy that we have, that's not excusing Al-Qaeda. That's not saying, oh, I see bin Laden's point of view, therefore he didn't do anything wrong. No, screw bin Laden. Yes, we still have to attack them. Yes, we still have to take them out. But you could also reflect and say, well, wait a minute. Could we have done things differently? Were there smarter ways to go about this? Did we exacerbate the situation? That's what I'm saying when it comes to Trump's policies, some of them towards Russia. We had a country in the United States literally spent 4 years with the most important story in this country, spreading a hoax that Vladimir Putin had groomed Donald Trump from when he was on The Apprentice to basically be a Manchurian candidate, and that they stole the 2016 election. We had senators saying it was an act of war that Russia had $50,000 of Facebook posts and $50,000 worth of posts on Pokemon Go, half of which supported Democrat causes, half of which supported Trump, and half of which weren't seen until after the election. They said, that's an act of war. Russia has committed an act of war, right? So all of this posturing towards Russia, they're evil, they're the boogeyman, they're terrible, they stole the election. Trump's part of it. Then the situations that I've aforementioned, it's certainly not making it less likely that Russia's going to take a hostile action. That's what I'm saying. I don't think that the sending of the Javelin missiles, the bombing of Syria, those things helped. What did they help? Those things occurred. Okay, what was good about those things occurring?
I think that this is a Neville Chamberlain, Neville Chamberlain-esque situation here. I think that arming Ukraine was the only right decision to happen, and that Russia
1 million dead Ukrainians so far we have, and counting.
If it wasn't Ukraine, it would have been further. It would have been other NATO countries.
Really? Because I talk to people that claim to have more expertise than you, and they say that's nonsense. That's a joke. For example, when I talked to Dylan Burns, he said it would be impossible. He said maybe they would get into. He said maybe Russia's military was so bad it's comical how bad they were. Maybe they could have made it into Moldova. But the idea that they were going to march through Europe and march through the NATO countries is nonsense. It's bullshit.
Would you allow me to justify myself?
Sure.
Okay, so here's how. So their original invasion into Ukraine. So the long lines of sort of armies into Kiev. All of that was the invasion in Ukraine, not Crimea, but the actual invasion, was based on the premise that Russia thought it was a lot stronger than it actually was. The propaganda and what even the West thought was that this would be a 3-day war and that Russia would have washed over Ukraine and taken it, and essentially the partisans will be there from the ending. From the partisan, they'll have to occupy this land, and the US will fund partisans. That's what everyone thought at the time. Now, that's not what happened, and partially, I would say that's because, Ukraine was so well armed by Trump. Now, you say, well, I think you're overblowing this. That would never happen. They would never attack Europe. I think, and Russia had an overinflated ego as the size and sort of power of their military. They were paranoid at the time, and how they would invade Europe would be much similar to how they did so in 2014. They wouldn't come in with tanks and stuff. They would send partisans into places they'd send partisan armies. They'd say, oh, this is the free people of
Poland. NATO. Give me the NATO country. You said they'd invade
Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia. That's sort of how.
Why didn't they do that now? Why didn't they do that now?
Well, I was calling back to a time when it wasn't apparently obvious. But Lenny,
I guess I'm misunderstanding you. You're saying they wouldn't have sent their own troops. Instead, they would have used propaganda to inspire sort of revolutionaries within these countries. Maybe they sent some special forces, something.
Yeah, so the original invasion of Ukraine, so the invasion of the Donbass and the invasion of the I can't remember the other state that they invaded, but there's Donbass, and I think it's the one above it. That was done with Russian troops, but Russia said, these aren't our troops. These are Russian people that are rising up to fight Ukraine.
Okay, but it was actually Russian troops.
Yes.
So then we would have. I don't think that Russia was going to send troops into NATO countries and prepare to go to war with NATO if we wouldn't have sent arms to Ukraine. I don't believe that. You're telling me you seriously believe 2022, if we didn't send arms to Ukraine, Russia would have blown right through Ukraine and then all of a sudden sent military troops into NATO countries?
If they had blown through Ukraine, so I'm saying if they had done that, I'm not saying necessarily the arms were the pivotal thing. I'm sure it helped. But if they had, then yeah, I think that would be next on the table.
I think it's ridiculous fear. What it is, it's ridiculous fear. Why don't we just nuke Russia then? Clearly, they're monstrous subhuman orcs let me finish. Clearly, they're monstrous subhuman orcs that will always keep fighting no matter what. And if they win in Ukraine, then they're going to go further to Lithuania. And if they win in Lithuania, they're going to go to Poland. And if they win in Poland, they're going to go to France and the UK. And if they win in France and UK, they're going to go to the United States. Might as well wipe them out now, right? Or do we just ask the Ukrainian people to die by the millions so that we could live in luxury here?
I wouldn't state by anything, but what I would state, I don't agree with those two positions you said. What I would state is that the US is launching medium-range missiles from Ukraine with US personnel into Russia. Nukes haven't flown yet.
Wow.
So like this idea that like war in Europe would happen and the nukes would be flying.
That's your argument. That's your argument. Your argument is, had we not been in there, they would have kept going and going and going and going. That's your argument. Now you say, well, clearly Russia is smart enough to not attack NATO allied countries because they know they'd get wiped out. In fact, the U.S. could attack them with impunity, and they won't fight back. They won't launch nukes. So why is it that on one hand we see that Vladimir Putin and Russia are these bloodthirsty subhuman orcs that will always attack no matter what, even if you could see that it's overwhelmingly a bad idea? There's no strategic benefit to going to war with NATO, none whatsoever. But you say they would. You say they would. You say they would. Okay, so explain to me, why doesn't Russia declare war on NATO right now? Why didn't they declare war on NATO in 2019? Why didn't they?
Hold on. Hold on. No. The strategic benefit of Russia to like push into NATO countries is the same reason as to why they would go in Ukraine. Russia wants to anchor itself against like natural defenses in the area so they can maximize their military spending. They hate the idea of these long sort of open sort of borderlands. So like think things that
you're just repeating. Let me take a guess. I think I mentioned this before you. You're getting this from Peter Zeihan?
Partially, yeah. That's
right. CIA asset war propagandist. For example, let me tell you what your man Peter Zeihan said. He said, you tell me if I'm wrong, that the way to end this war was he had to cause a mass casualty event in Russia. Correct? He said this.
I'm not sure what he said.
He said the way to cause that mass casualty event would be that Ukraine, NATO, etc. would bomb this one particular dam, because this dam was responsible for so much of the irrigation of farmland that Russia uses to feed their people. And so if this dam was blown up, it could be a mass casualty event that would lead to the starvation of all of these people in Russia. And he said that that was likely to be a scenario that would occur from the West and Ukraine to try to end this war, because only history shows us that only if there is such intense casualties on the part of Russia will they prevent their escalation further. And then you know what happened? That dam got bombed.
I'm not entirely certain about this argument.
Okay, well, let me. I'll finish the story. The dam got bombed, and then you know what Peter Zeihan said? The Russians did it. They bombed their own dam. That's what happened. They literally took the one action that Peter Zeihan said was necessary to defeating Russia, but Russia took that action themselves. And how dare you? You're a crazy conspiracy theorist if you think that the U.S. blew up that dam or Ukraine blew up that dam. By the way, it's the same with the pipeline. Nah, Russia blew up their own pipeline. This is nonsense. The truth is that there is bad actors within Russia, right? Just like there are bad actors within our State Department, and there is a conflict, a world struggle going on of powers, and there is ebb and flow to it. But just like the United States isn't just going to invade Russia because they know that that would be bad optically and it wouldn't have strategigic value, that's the same reason that Russia is not going to do that to a NATO country. They're going to have sort of proxy situations that occur. But what you're literally giving the explanation for is what I mean. Why shouldn't the United States give nuclear weapons to Ukraine right now? Why shouldn't they?
Listen. I'm not for the proliferation of nuclear weapons. Or
why not? War. If it would end the war quicker, what's it matter? You're for millions of Ukrainians dying, and I assume millions of Russians as well. to fight
Hold on,
this
I'm
battle,
not,
right?
hold on. I'm not pro casualties. I think that
You're
the
pro
end
policies
result-
that you know will cause these mass casualties.
No, I'm saying to you that the Russian government is going to engage in a series of strategies that they're going to try and rebuild the Soviet Union.
Okay.
And that casualties are going to happen regardless because of
That's true. So
the
shouldn't we try to limit?
territorial ambitions?
Should we try
of
to limit the
USSR.
casualties of our allies like Ukraine?
I mean, absolutely, we should give them. As
Okay,
much
so
weapons
then
as
why
we
shouldn't we
possibly
give them weapons that would help them win clearly?
Hold on. I mean, nuclear weapons are not. Nuclear weapons are. It's a different ball game to everything else. I'm not for giving nuclear weapons to Ukraine. I
Okay,
think
let's
that
take out
would
nuclear
be
weapons.
one of
Every
those-
other conventional weapon should be on the table. In fact, why shouldn't the United States and NATO attack Russia? Why shouldn't they? Wouldn't it help? Or do we just say, nah, we know that would help end the war, but we're not going to do it. Instead, we'd rather see millions of Ukrainians die.
I'm not for a direct confrontation with
Why?
Russia.
You already said
for-
Russia's not going to do anything. We're already sending mid-range missiles and they're not doing anything. They can't.
What I was saying to you with that particular comment was that the threshold for nuclear war, so for using nuclear weapons, seems to be a lot higher than what
What's the
people
threshold?
originally would be.
So give me an idea for what
higher,
the threshold.
It's higher than sending. So it's higher than a foreign country using missiles to
Okay.
like a large portion.
How
of their
about
country.
bombers? How about we send bombers over Russian cities and bomb them? Is that the threshold?
That would probably be the threshold.
Why?
Yeah,
What's the difference? So sending a missile from Ukraine, paid for by the United States, and maybe even with U.S. military personnel sending those missiles, that's not the threshold. But sending an airplane, presumably from Ukraine, to drop a bomb, that would be the threshold. Can you explain to me the difference?
I imagine that's the threshold.
Why?
I was more saying that,
So put yourself in Putin's shoes. What's the difference between those two actions?
the difference between those two actions is like one is direct, is like it's like if you're sending bombers over Russia, then like essentially you're going to use your army at some point. Once by the point where you've like used bombers in there, you would be willing to send in your army. There is a veil of
Okay, if you're willing to send missiles and have your personnel launch missiles from an adjacent country, you're willing to
which
send
is
the
what
army.
we both agree is happening, right?
Correct. So you're
We
willing
both
to send.
agree that-
So you're willing to send your army then? Why wouldn't Russia believe
I-
that? You just got done telling us that Russia is so paranoid. They're so paranoid they say, well, as long as the United States is just launching missiles from Ukraine, we're cool with that. But if they would launch an airplane from Ukraine, now our paranoia kicks in and we assume they're putting boots on the ground next.
I would say direct war with Russia would probably listen. I can't tell you Russia's red lines because we haven't run into them yet.
Well, we
But I
may,
can
and
tell
then you
what
may
is-
regret it. Then your blusterous talk might be something that you regret.
It's quite possible that we may run into it, but it's clear from as of now that that missiles launched from Ukraine into Russia isn't that.
It's clear to me that what's going on is as follows: that there was antagonization from the West, but it doesn't justify what Russia did. There was potential for a more peaceful resolution early in this conflict, which sadly, because Ukraine is coming from a position of weakness, would have meant that Ukraine had to give something up. That was shut down by people in the West, including people in the UK that bragged about it. Right? I think Tony Blair that was said that would put the kibosh on that. It's clear that the West wanted this conflict to go, and you see leaders in the West like Lindsey Graham has said this. This is great. We're causing immense damage to Russia's military. That's great. We're causing them to spend immense money. And the people that are suffering from it, the people that are winning are military industrial people in the United States, politicians in the United States, people in certain positions in Ukraine, like the leadership of Ukraine. They're winning massively. The people that are losing are the people of Russia, the people of Ukraine, and the average people in countries like the United States, whose government doesn't give a shit about us because they're busy laundering billions of dollars in weapons, etc., to places like Ukraine. And now let me spoil the ending for you. And I hope that I'm wrong, but let me spoil it. You want to know what the ending is? It's going to be real similar to the ending of Libya and real similar to the ending of Afghanistan. The ending will be this. Inevitably, a new cause will come about, and the United States will abandon Ukraine. And Ukraine will be in the same position that it started with, or worse. And the United States will be onto something totally different. All of the noble politicians in the United States and NATO that have Ukrainian flags on their lapels and on their social media accounts, they'll be talking about the next country. Fuck those people of Ukraine, just like the people of Afghanistan. Fuck them. Whatever. The Taliban took over again, and now they're all being treated more harshly. Oh, well, we have other things to deal with now. Right? That's the end of the story. And what's Ukraine going to have to show for it? An entire generation of young men wiped out. That's what's going to be shown for it. And we'll be in the same position as we were 3 years ago.
I have two things. The first is that Rob, you're an American. One of your core values is give me freedom or give me death. Does Ukraine not have the? Would you say
absolutely?
Ukraine doesn't have the right?
I couldn't agree more. Let them fight for freedom. Where does my core values say that we need to be interventionist and fund people in countries around the world and fund both sides of a conflict? For example, Ukraine is we're sending money and military equipment to Ukraine, who's then sending money, soldiers, and military equipment to al-Nusra and al-Qaeda in Syria. We're funding the Kurds in Syria to fight against ISIS, which Assad's also fighting against, but we also have to fight against Assad and fund Assad, and we have nuclear weapons stationed in Turkey who were duty-bound, treaty-bound to defend militaristically, but we have to stay in Syria perpetually because if we leave, then our ally, the Turks, will commit genocide against our ally, the Kurds. We fund Palestine and all sorts of organizations that fund places like Hezbollah and Hamas, but then we also fund the Israeli military equipment. I couldn't agree with you more. The people of Ukraine should have the right to self-determination. Damn shame that the United States has been involved in their political system going back for years, let alone in 2014 where they helped with that color revolution to get installed Poroshenko. By the way, let me ask you, if it was so great in the United States, you'll agree with this, right? The United States backed Poroshenko. He was a good ally to the Obama administration, right?
I don't know enough about.
Okay, well, why did he lose to a stand-up comedian? Poroshenko.
I mean, hold on. Why did the establishment in America lose so heavily to a TV show host?
Exactly. Why? You tell me. Why do you think? Great point. Why? Why do you think? Yes, you make
because these politicians aren't all that charismatic, and these TV shows.
Charisma? You think that's what? So you think the people were duped? You think that before Donald Trump, that actually Barack Obama or John McCain or Mitt Romney or Bush or whatever, you think those people were actually doing really great for the American people, and it's just the American people were stupid and they were just suckered in by charisma. That's why Trump won.
I didn't say that. I said
would
that
you?
A lot of these politicians are not.
Okay,
as
but that would seem to imply when you said the reason had something to do with charisma was that Trump had it and they didn't, which would mean that there aren't legitimate reasons. Do you think that there's a chance that there were millions of Americans that felt disenfranchised, that felt that the system wasn't working for them?
Certainly.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Do you think the same could... Right. So Trump won for the same reason that there was support for someone like Bernie Sanders, or there was support for someone like AOC. Because people were looking for people they perceived as outside the establishment institutions because they felt the system wasn't working for them. That's also what happened in Ukraine. In Ukraine, we had a shitty guy running the show in Yanukovych that was basically a vassal of Russia, and then he was replaced with a shitty guy running the country in Poroshenko that was basically a vassal of the United States. And the people of Ukraine were willing to take a chance on Zelensky, whose biggest issue that he was running on was corruption. So all of these politicians that the United States were backing in Ukraine, and we can talk specifically if you want about the Hunter Biden involvement with Burisma is just the most clear-cut story of this. Joe Biden's the point person in Ukraine to deal with corruption. He threatens to withhold $1 billion that Ukraine was promised, which would certainly upset the people of Ukraine that were relying on that money, threatens to withhold it unless a corrupt, in the words of Biden, prosecutor named Viktor Shokin gets fired. Viktor Shokin, by the way, is the guy who's tasked with investigating the company that Joe Biden's son's on the board of directors on. So Viktor Shokin gets fired, and this new guy, Leschenko, gets put in. Maybe it's Lysenko. I'm screwing up my names here. And you know what? Everyone in Ukraine knew that dude was corrupt. The new central prosecutor had no qualifications to be a prosecutor, had been let go from previous government jobs from embezzling money, and even the anti-corruption activists in Ukraine that hated Shokin was like, we knew instantly that this guy was a fucking joke, but he was supported by the United States. The same with Poroshenko. Everybody knew Poroshenko was like this corrupt strongman, but he sucked up to the United States. So the people of Ukraine are desperate. They're like, this shit sucks. We don't want these corrupt people that aren't looking out for our interests first. They're more looking out for the interest of the United States. They have the right to self-determination. I completely agree. But unfortunately, they have these two superpowers that are putting all of this influence on them because of their geopolitical importance. And so the people of Ukraine are stuck between a rock and a hard place. So my solution to it is we need to stop putting these countries in this situation. If the United States wasn't backing Ukraine and Ukraine said, we will fight to every last man, woman, and child, I would say they absolutely have the right to do that. I would not take that away. Me saying they have the right to self-determination, and if they choose to continue this conflict until every one of them is dead, that's tragic, but that's their choice. They should have the dignity as humans to make that choice if they want. That doesn't mean that my country needs to be involved in that war.
Okay, so I have two things. I'm going to start with the less egregious, and then we'll get to the more egregious in your eyes. And so the first thing is that have you ever seen like Lavrov's speeches in regards to like the United States and stuff like that? Have you ever watched any of those?
I have seen transcripts. I don't know that I've seen like a literal speech of him sitting there that was transcribed as he was reading it.
If I've seen like at least in 3 separate occasions him talking about he wants to bring down the world order, change the system of power, more or less talking about how he's going to end like the US sort of system of the US global order as it was, because that's essentially what it is. The second thing is this part of this. First thing is that I've heard him also talk about how he is a friend to any nation that is in opposition to the US. So like Russia is sort of like putting itself out to be like the enemy of the United States.
Okay.
And a way to sort of like illustrate this is, you know what happened on October 7th, correct?
Correct.
Right. Do you know the other thing is that Putin's birthday is October 7th?
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Think about it. There's like, you had Putin training members of Hamas in Syria. So, in Syria. So, what I would say is that, I
just want to be clear. You're saying that Russia directed Hamas to attack Israel on October 7th because it was Putin's birthday?
I don't know whether that... I don't know. Probably not. But perhaps...
Then why did you bring up Putin's birthday again?
And perhaps because clearly... Like, what are you? Are you a man of coincidences at all? Come on. There's no fucking way that Hamas, like, launches, like, the biggest attack on Israel. The United States is... greatest, one of their allies, and puts it on.
Yeah, I disagree. There is a way. There is a way. The idea that so I just want to be clear, right? Had it not been Putin's birthday but been Lavrov's, would you say, "Oh, that's just coincidence"?
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
But you just said you don't believe in coincidence.
Well, I mean, like this is like the Lavrov is like the financial. He's the foreign minister. My apologies. He's not the head of the show, right? And it's not ultimately at his direction that members of Hamas are being trained.
I mean, so you're saying that Vladimir Putin is personally ordering members of Hamas to be trained, and that because his birthday's on October 7th, it clearly can't be a coincidence that that's when those members of Hamas attacked Israel.
I would say that perhaps it was a gift. Perhaps Iran put them up to it in conjunction with Putin. It's like I don't think it's that much of a stretch to say that this like war in Israel has been a great
how long? So
let's
let's go through this just a little bit. This is awesome. So how long has Putin been training Hamas with Iran?
I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell you exactly.
Give me a ballpark. I don't need you to give an exact day. Has it been 10 years?
I couldn't give you a ballpark, but there was a previous we'll say 10 years short. Why not? 10
Okay.
years, something like
Why did you support Obama and the West sending billions of dollars to Iran then, knowing that that money would go to Putin and Hamas?
I'm not pro Obama. No,
I'm not saying you're pro Obama. I'm asking if you're pro that specific policy.
No.
So then,
The Iran deal was very shitty.
So then you'll admit that the United States funded Hamas. Did you know that Obama's birthday's... What are you laughing about? We sent billions of dollars. You don't think that the U.S. State Department, you don't think the Obama administration knew of this connection between Putin, Hamas, and Iran?
Oh, look, surely they did, but
Okay.
I mean, surely
Did they know that because Putin and Iran are allies and they're training Hamas, that money would inevitably be used for purposes that were antagonistic to the United States and its allies?
I mean, I think the hope, I would say, to like put me in a position which I don't want to be in to defend Obama. I would.
Do you know when Obama's birthday is?
When is Obama's
October
birthday?
7th.
Truly?
Yes. Now that can't be a coincidence, correct? Obama sent them billions of dollars.
All right, you got me. You got me there. You got me there. You got me there, Rob.
So you're admitting that you think that specifically chose October 7th because it's Obama's birthday.
No, of course not. But
wait, you're certain that that's why they did it with Putin's birthday?
Well, I mean, Putin is training. Putin's people are training and have been training Hamas fighters.
Obama's people funded them.
When you say funded them,
Right.
Rob, you don't actually mean they directly gave money to Hamas. What you're saying is, well, the American government gave money to the Iranian government, and
knowing that it would go to Hamas.
Yes. Did all of it go to Hamas? Do we know
Doesn't
this?
matter.
How much?
What, money's fungible, right? Would the Obama administration send $6 billion to the KKK? And then say, well, no, see, he just intended for them to buy food with that money. The fact that they brought racist propaganda and weapons to have a racial war, that's not on Obama. He was just funding their food purchases, humanitarian purchases.
I mean, I'm sort of like, the thing what I'm saying here is more of a direct connection. I'm saying Putin is directly involved in the training of Hamas members. Hamas members attack Israel. But you're saying that Obama funded Iran, that funds Hamas, and Hamas attacks Israel.
It can't be a coincidence. It can't be a coincidence that Obama's birthday is October 7th. That can't be. I don't believe in coincidences. I don't know about you.
I mean, maybe that's the case. Who knows?
Yeah, that's how silly they attack because Putin's birthday October 7th narrative is. By the way, I have no idea when Barack Obama's birthday is, but
oh, you fucker. Oh.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a silly, stupid point. Look, the truth of the matter is, I do have other callers, so I'd be happy to set up a one-on-one discussion with you. Want this? We can go the full 2 hours or longer. I don't care. But
that's fine.
I do enjoy talking to you. But like, no, I think the problem is, yeah, it's certainly true that we live in a multipolar world. The truth is, it doesn't matter. You'll never have a world. Well, unless you're like an Alan Moore, like the Watchmen type. Have you ever read The Watchmen? Like, the whole premise of The Watchmen is it's taking place during the Cold War, and that this guy who's a hero, Ozymandias, he comes to the conclusion that inevitably there'll be a global nuclear war between the Soviets and the United States and its allies unless there's an outside enemy. And so he sets it up so it looks like aliens attack and kill like 5 million people in New York City. That way, the United States and Russia end the Cold War and come together as allies to fight this perceived bigger threat. But beyond that, you're never going to get a world where everyone's just like, yeah, there's a superpower, and we're cool with that. No one's going to challenge that. So yeah, it's true that ever since the United States became the superpower, there's been other countries that said, we don't like it. We're going to challenge that. That's certainly true. So the idea that like Lavrov's like, we'll go with anyone that's against the United States does the same shit. The United States does all sorts of stuff that's intentionally anti. I give you some examples already. We had U.S. senators that were saying it was an act of war that Russia supposedly put $50,000 into Pokemon Go and Facebook ads going into the election. That's fucking nuts. The United States clearly does worse propaganda to that to every country in the world. But they were saying that was an act of war. How would Russia feel? Well, we take this as a threat then. We had U.S. senators, etc., suggest assassinating Vladimir Putin. How do you think they took that? That doesn't justify Putin's militaristic actions against the United States or against Ukraine. Similarly, Lavrov's speeches wouldn't justify those sorts of actions from the United States against Putin. In my opinion, I think what happened was that Russia sucks and that they absolutely see strategic value in Ukraine, and they're pissed off because they had what I think was influence in Ukraine that was detrimental to the people of Ukraine, and that got taken away, not by noble people in the Obama State Department that then had the best interest of the Ukrainians at heart, but by people at the Obama State Department that also saw strategic value in having control in Ukraine, in particular that it hurt Russia. And once more, didn't give a shit about what was the best interest of the people of Ukraine. And they're more than happy to see the people of Ukraine die, just like Russia was more than happy to see the people of Vietnam die when the United States was involved in a conflict in Vietnam. Soviets didn't give a shit about the people of Vietnam. They didn't care. Great. It's a big loss for our enemy. Keep going. We'll keep financing them. We'll keep funding them. We'll keep training them. Absolutely. That's what's going on right now. If the argument is, I don't give a shit about the people of Ukraine, fuck them. It's great that we're using that country to take down a military threat to the United States. Fine, at least that's an argument. But I'm not going to listen to people like stand that they're somehow moron. We have this noble duty to protect the people of Ukraine, and they're just, they have the right to defend themselves. Of course they have the right to defend themselves, but that's not why the U.S. military and intelligence is there. It has nothing to do. They'll let them die to the last person. They won't give a shit. And then they'll take the assets of their country. That's what's going to happen. And when people like me are like, maybe we should have pursued more diplomatic, maybe those diplomatic relationships wouldn't have worked. But I just said, the comment that you initially said was, I thought that there was aggressive posturing that sometimes went too far under the Trump administration towards Russia. The worst of which was the bombing Syria, which you didn't mention. But there's no strategic value in that. It was an incredible mistake. We should not be bombing foreign nations based on our guess that they hurt their own people before investigations are even carried out. That shouldn't happen. The reason it happened was because they want to bomb Syria. They want an excuse. That's why they did it. Because they know that it harms Russia and it harms our perceived enemies. That's it. That's how I feel about the situation. So I think that we should try to pursue a diplomatic solution now, and maybe it won't work out. But I do think that it's too flippant that we're on the cusp. We're closer now to a nuclear war than we've been since the Cold War. And everyone just seems to be like, oh, don't be a coward. And I don't think that's the right approach at all.
I mean, but I can agree with you. On the sense that there is sort of like a greater threat to us all, and nuclear warfare is the greatest threat to like global security, and like if it happens somewhere, we're all fucked. Even if it wasn't like directly to us. But you can't. I honestly think that Putin's goals are maybe not now so much now that he's like had his nose bloodied, but there is, considering everything he's said. Considering everything is done, there is no reason to think that he won't continue to do things like they did to Ukraine, to his other neighbors, going forward. And so I think like the decision to like arm Ukraine is actually a really good one. I think that I think that it supports Ukraine to sort of like be more independent, and like that is it's a good thing that us Western countries we all sort of like we support governments that support their own people, and I think it's good to have countries that are like-minded to us. Now, I understand that there is and you sort of mentioned the fact that that there was corruption in Ukraine, and sure, perhaps that was the case, but I still think I'm of the belief that it is the people of Ukraine that chose to that perhaps they were supported by the United States in some way.
Let me ask you. Not to cut you off, but let me ask you, because this is something I haven't. There are a lot of people that have similar beliefs to you, and I haven't had a chance to ask anyone this. Of course, none of us would disagree. The people that in Ukraine that want to fight, they should absolutely have that right. What about the people that didn't? So, estimates show that there were 500,000 young men that tried to flee the country that were basically drafted. Did they have the right to flee?
I listen. That is a matter for Ukraine. I mean, like,
now wait a minute. Now why would
not everyone in that country is like? I mean, there is a sense of not every country is like the same in terms of like your sense of responsibility.
Sure,
to the state.
agree.
You agree with that, right? And I feel as if like my heart goes out to them. I don't want anyone dying in Ukraine. I don't want any Russians dying.
I believe
I want
that,
the
yeah.
Russians to like stop and go away. Even if, and I hope Trump is successful. I'm glad, I hope he's successful in his diplomatic negotiations. But this, I guess, just like to answer your question, not change the topic. I'm not sure. I'm not sure about, like, perhaps in Ukraine there is a larger sense of responsibility to the community than there is elsewhere. If they want to free, I'm of the opinion. If it was me, I would say they should be allowed to leave. But I'm not going to condemn them for like trying to defend their country.
Well, the point I want to make, the reason I make that's because you sort of open the door to that sort of conversation when you make the point, well, don't they have the right to defend themselves? Of course. But if we're talking about rights, we're not talking about that. Like, the truth is, and I've been hesitant to criticize a lot of the things that Zelensky's done. For example, they suspended elections. Now, I think that's bad. I think even in the United States, we've been at war and we still had an election, right? But I'm not in that position of being a country that's clearly the underdog who's currently being invaded, right? So I've been hesitant to criticize Zelensky. Others have. I'm not the biggest Zelensky fan, but I've been hesitant on that because I say, well, I don't know. It's their country. Who knows? But the point I'm trying to make is just because we could look and say, well, look, it's a difficult situation to understand. What would it be like there? Don't they have the human right to defend themselves? Of course. I say the same thing about Israel, by the way, right? I might think that Israel's reaction goes too far, but don't they have the right to defend themselves?
100% they do.
Right. Now, that doesn't mean that objectively we can't look at it from the outside and say, I'm not saying you agree with this, but hypothetically we find out that they bombed a hospital and killed a bunch of kids. That's bad. That's objectively bad. And if it was done intentionally, we could say that's horrible. You shouldn't do that. But also, you have to put yourself in their position. If my family member got murdered at a dance festival and their bodies strewn throughout the street, I might know that it's objectively bad to say, to hell with you, I'm just going to indiscriminately bomb the shit out of your country. But as a father, I'd say, fuck you. I don't care. It's a difficult position because you have to look at it in two things. You have to look at it as what's objectively correct, and then you have to look at it as, but can you understand the position? The difference, of course, with Israel and Ukraine is Israel's coming at the situation from strength. Israel conventionally is much stronger than Hamas and Palestine. It's the opposite in Ukraine. So if we look at it, and again, I'm not asking people to, I know there's all sorts of beliefs of what happened on October 7th, but if we look at it from the context of Hamas invaded Israel and had a heinous attack, and Russia invaded Ukraine and had a heinous attack, well, the difference is Israel being invaded is the more powerful country. So they're going to get their pound of flesh. They're going to say, no, we're not ready to negotiate yet. We're going to cause you some pain. And then after we cause what we think's enough pain, maybe then we sit down to the negotiating table from an incredible position of strength. Ukraine doesn't have that luxury.
Ukraine can't really do that.
Right.
They shouldn't. That would be incredibly unwise for them to do that. But my position isn't that. I don't think that's the real issue here. I think that it is entirely possible that we go 4 years down the line and Russia's rebuilt that arsenal again, and they're going to go for round two to try and capture the rest.
But they would do that anyways, right? The best possible solution, in my opinion, like if the argument is this, well, we keep funding Ukraine until they beat back Russia. I don't know what that means. Like, for me, I think you've even seen people in the West admit this. We don't see a path for victory for Ukraine. We don't see it as it's currently been. So the only way Ukraine's going to win, in my opinion, would be, one, there's some type of internal strife within Russia that causes a mass change in leadership there. So maybe there's a coup or a revolution that occurs in Russia. Or secondly, that actual powerful militaries from around the world get more involved. And they're like, we're going to directly attack Russia. If it's just, well, we just keep sending these types of weapons to Ukraine, they're running out of people. And yeah, Russia is too. But let's assume that, for the sake of argument, let's say that Russia runs out of people or willpower before Ukraine because we're funding them. Okay, then what's the next step? What would you do after that? So Russia turns tail and leaves. Now what? Now what do we do?
Okay. When you say turns tail or leaves, you mean like they dig in, or they like get out of?
No,
Ukraine
they get out of Ukraine, totally. They realize, look, we're losing so much manpower, it's not worth it. We're going to go back and lick our wounds. So they just, all the areas that they've controlled, they just literally get up and leave. Obviously, I'm not trying to be utopian. It's not going to be like one day. But over the span of 3 months, they pull out, right? And they go back. But would you suggest then invading Russia?
No, absolutely not.
Right,
Ukraine
of course.
would-
But then,
and any sort of funding, if this becomes like Ukraine's, if Ukraine decides to go for that 1 pound of flesh, that's a different ball game. If Russia is,
I
not
think we shouldn't get
interested-
involved. If they want to do it, go for it. I say.
Yeah,
It would be a
well,
mistake.
sure,
We
but
shouldn't back them,
sure, but that would be completely
Their
their prerogative.
yeah.
I wouldn't be interested in funding
Sure.
Ukraine's war of retribution. But what I would say is that there is a third way, and I think the third way is like the economic toll to Russia. There is clearly a point in which Putin hasn't ordered a full mobilization of the Russian economy. He doesn't want to do that to his people. It'll be too unpopular for him, and the financial toll on Russia is starting to bankrupt it. You're looking at Russian interest rates at about 20%. They've got like what they come out with as like the inflation rate, which they say is like 8% or something ridiculous like that. But if you go to like anywhere like the stories that are like on the internet, if you give that a little bit of credence, is like the price of butter is like doubling every year
I
or something.
personally believe that's probably true. I think that there's probably a massive economic toll to Russia. Like you said, it's difficult because you're relying on the organizations reporting this, and sometimes it's hard to know. But yeah, I'll take that at face value. But the point I'm trying to make is, this seems, though, if your intelligence of what Russia is true, they're going to just do it again. They're going to build back up. They're never going to, I can't envision, and again, I'm sort of unfairly to you putting Peter Zeihan's position onto what you would think. But Zeihan's argument, and let's accept it at face value for a moment, which is due to demographics, declining birth rates, and things like that, this is it. This is the last generation for Russia. This is it. This is their last chance. No matter what the U.S. did or whatever, like, Russia now feels it's right now or never. We will never be this strong again. So we have to take some sort of military action. So any idea that the United States provoked it or anything like that, it's clearly nonsense. Because Russia was going to do this no matter what. Not because of what Ukraine did, not because of what the United States did, but literally because of demographics. And they're like, we literally won't have the manpower to do something like this again. And because of that, our influence in the world is going to shrink and shrink and shrink. And we're worried if we don't get certain land areas under our control now that give us access to like good farming land, good ports, etc., that we're screwed. We'll never get access to those again. So we have to do it now. But the problem with that mentality is, if their decline is inevitable, what's to stop them from using nukes? What's to stop them from saying, you know what, this is it. If we're going out anyways, we have one last ace in the hole. We're going to start throwing threats around with this shit, right? And that's sort of, you're not saying that exact thing that Peter Zeihan is, but you're saying like, well, no matter what, Russia's going to, this is who they are. They're paranoid. They're going to keep, if they think that, European
Their
Union
invasion into Ukraine was born from a paranoid place.
Right.
I think that the reasons that they went into Ukraine are the same reasons as to why they would go into other places. They want to push up against, like, I think it's the.
But why would that stop? Why would it ever stop? Can you envision a world where Russia's no longer like that?
I think this is like, I think so, like, every country has like a series of ideas that have captured it. And sort of like, and I feel as if like an idea that has captured the Russians right now is like the glory days of the Soviet Union and like the security that it had.
That I think it's more the
with, like,
security
all of its
that matters.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a lot of the glory, but I think for me, the best way to deal with this problem isn't then we'll fund a proxy country to have a war with them in hopes that it beats them back militaristically, because unless you're going to finish the job, Russia's just going to go back, lick their wounds, and 15, 20 years from now, we're in the exact same position. To me, the better chance for success is let's try to have some sort of assuaging of their fears. They're fearing that they're being encircled. They fear that all of these countries that were former Soviet blocs are now joining basically economic and military alliances that are basically strategically against Russia. So instead, let's try to bring them into the fold. Now, again, I don't like Putin, but if you listen to Putin's interview with Tucker Carlson, the most important part of that interview, which, by the way, Putin, I don't think comes off sounding good in that interview at all, but the most important part's where he talks about how when he was talking to sort of the Bush presidency and the Obama presidency, there were talks of bringing Russia into NATO, right? And he was all for it. Was like, yeah, that sounds tremendous. Yes. And that both Bush and I remember particularly he talks about Obama. He talked to Obama and he's basically, I'm putting words in his mouth, but basically my interpretation of it was like, Obama seemed like a chill guy. Was like, sure, like let's try to have. The problem wasn't Obama. It was the CIA. It was the people running the show behind Obama that was like, no. You can't do that. Now, maybe it's true that the CIA people are right, that Putin would have just pretended to be a good guy and Russia to be peaceful to get into NATO and then continued their bullshit. That may be true. Like, maybe like the World Trade Organization or something like that. But the point I'm trying to make is that seems to be a better outcome, that you try to pursue a diplomatic solution, and if it doesn't work, then you say, fuck it then. We tried our best, now we go to war. As opposed to, well, we're going to bomb Syria. We're going to put bases in Syria. We're going to put biolabs right outside Russia. We're going to send weapons to Ukraine. Oh, Russia invaded. Oh, now, to me, like that all but makes it inevitable. Let's say that there was a 10% chance that the diplomatic way would have worked. There's like only a 1% chance that the current strategy worked. And so why not pursue the diplomatic strategy? And particularly, and last thing I'll say, particularly now where it's like, I don't see any hope for the people of Ukraine. I don't see how they win unless, it's oftentimes, it's shitty to say this, and I'm not advocating for this, but oftentimes the middle ground is the worst solution, right? Just being like, well, we'll send Ukraine just enough weapons to stay in the fight, and it'll just perpetually drag on, but we'll make sure that we say, no, they have to keep fighting. It's values. They have to keep fighting the evil, tyrannical, no peaceful resolution. Keep sending weapons, just enough to keep Ukrainians dying. That seems like the worst solution. Either say, fuck it, we're sending the big guns. We're doing everything. Fuck you, Russia. You're going to stop immediately. Or let's pursue a peaceful resolution now. I think the current situation's the worst of both worlds.
That could very well be the case, but I would like to steelman your argument from earlier, right? So I think I believe in the 1990s you had what was the gentleman who was like constantly getting drunk, and he was the first president of Russia before
Yeltsin, was it?
Yeltsin,
Boris Yeltsin,
yeah.
Is that who?
Boris Yeltsin, yeah. Him and Clinton, they actually had a stunning relationship from what I've seen and what I've read about it, and that there was there was talk of them bringing NATO into them into like NATO and stuff like that as well, or they're the +1. But the problem came up that it wasn't actually them. Yeltsin kept saying, well, you can't expand NATO this, you can't expand NATO, you can't sort of bring NATO that, all on the backs of like American foreign aid being sent into Russia to save it from like economic collapse. But like the countries in the ground started saying, like Poland and stuff, they were like, you're going to let us into NATO or we're going to start developing nukes because we don't trust these guys. And at that point, for Clinton, he's like, well, we'd rather see deproliferation. We'll bring them into NATO. And hopefully, I think there was like an alternative peace plan as well. There was like the peace plan +1 or something like that, where they were trying to incorporate the Russians and like the former blocs into like a peace treaty. But the former states, like if they have any sovereignty at all, none of them really wanted Russia in there. They all viewed Russia with a great sense of distrust, and they were going to pursue nuclear weapons if given the chance to, if given a choice between not joining NATO and joining NATO. And I think that's sort of like where we're at with Ukraine, where Ukraine's going to come out of the end of this war. Trump will probably secure some sort of peace agreement there. No one will like it. It'll be entirely shit. they won't be allowed into NATO. And suddenly they're going to start building nukes, and we're going to see another war like this 4 years down the line, because there's no way Russia allows Ukraine to get nuclear weapons and having that sort of self-determination. I just don't think that there is to sort of like, we have to bend over backwards and break our backs to try and give Russia an out for something that is basically of their own volition. They're doing this because they want to.
It's not to give Russia, but that's not the. It's if you cared about the people of Ukraine, right? That's the problem. They have to approach the negotiation from the position of weakness, because they are the weaker country. So what the United States could do to facilitate that is try to achieve the best deal possible. That deal, there was a better chance. Like, even if you just look at it for the first 200 days of this war, I think we both agree that both the Western world and I would say Russia was probably shocked at how poorly they initially did. Would you agree with that? In Ukraine?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think that early would have been the best time to negotiate, because now it seems like, I think that all the smart money's on, unless something radically changes, Ukraine ain't, there's no path to victory for Ukraine here. There's just not. And so Russia, yeah, it's hurting them maybe economically back home in some senses, but I just don't, at this point, it seems like negotiating now, Russia's from a slightly better position than they would have been then. And what do we have to show for it in the meantime? Tons of deaths of Ukrainians and of Russians, if you give a shit. I'm not saying you, but other people might not give a shit. I think you care. I care. Fuck it, man. The people of Russia are just like if I had to go to Iraq, if I signed up for the military and had to go there, am I a shitty person? I don't think so.
It's not even that. It's people in Russia are being rounded up. They're being slapped with conscription orders, and they're being forced into the middle of the Ukraine. Russia doesn't give two shits about it.
Correct. So I feel bad for the Russians. I find, in fact, one of the things I find most disgusting on all sides of this issue is I fucking hate. First off, I hate in general. X is my favorite platform to use for current events, but I hate porn showing up on my feed. That pisses me off. But even worse than that, I hate, and it's almost always out of Ukraine, these videos of soldiers dying, whether they be Russians or Ukrainians. It's fucking despicable. Like, to watch people's reaction. Oh, fuck this Russian, he had it coming. Fuck this Ukrainian, he had it coming. It's like, Jesus. Those are just people, scared shitless because some drone is about to kill them and they know there's nothing they could do about it. To me, it's it's neither here nor there for what we're talking. I think that just this idea that, look, it's inevitable that there's going to be conflict between Russia and others, and so therefore we have to address this hostile posture, then fine, go all the way with it. But I think this sort of middling, it's just, none of it makes sense to me. It just seems, and what I'm suggesting is, just like with the lead up into September 11th, we shouldn't put our foot in viper's dens, right? We shouldn't have policies that we know are intentionally going to be antagonistic. That's what bombing Assad was. That's what sending javelins. That's what, financing the Poroshenko regime was. That's what it was. And there's a greater game going on here. And I don't even know, I know 1% of the details, no more than basically the average person. But I know that these countries, just like during the Cold War, countries like Ukraine, they're just being used as proxies from two actors that aren't looking at the benefit of the people of Ukraine. The United States sees strategic value in harming Russia. Russia sees strategic value in themselves for Ukraine. And, maybe similar to how you would say a country like Cuba. Why was the Soviet Union supporting Cuba? Well, it wasn't that they saw much benefit themselves, but they knew it was a big thorn in the side of the United States, right off the coast of the United States. So, oh boy, we're going to prop up Castro. We're going to prop up, and how'd the United States feel about that? Not very good. About the idea of weapons like that being stationed off the coast. So, for me, I just think when I'm talking specifically, I'm not claiming to have all the answers. All I know is I don't trust our State Department. I don't trust our intel agencies. I don't think they're benevolent people. I think they almost always make the situation worse. And I want a peaceful resolution. And when I'm condemning the specifics of when I thought Trump was too aggressive, I'm basically saying I think that sending those javelins didn't help the situation. And I certainly think the bombing of Assad in the way that it was done was despicable. And I would have said the same thing about Obama, and I would have said the same thing about Bush, and I'd say the same thing about Biden. Initially, Biden, right out of the gate, this is what Biden, if you remember his first month or so in office, don't quote me on first month, but it was very early in Biden's administration. Do you remember he bombed Syria? You remember this?
I can't say I remember this. I'm not super plugged in.
The story was he bombed Syria because Iranian militants were in Syria attacking U.S. assets. So he bombed a sovereign country because another country had people in there. That would be the equivalent of the United States bombing Canada because we find a Chinese terror cell in Canada. Do you think the Canadian government would be like, oh, fair enough? Of course not. Like, you can't just bomb sovereign nations, or I guess you can, but you understand that it's going to increase hostilities, right? Like,
how do you feel about Trump blowing up? I think it was Khamenei. Oh, sorry, maybe it's not Khamenei. There was the big Iranian general that was like leader of the revolution.
Well, he blew him up in Iran, right?
Not Iran. He blew him up in, I think it was Iraq.
Yeah, it's a little different than because I don't know that the government of Iraq protested that. But a direct attack on a U.S. base that you say this guy carried out this attack, that's sort of act of war type stuff. That's different than we think that this third country that we're not claiming was involved whatsoever in Syria, right? Well, let me rephrase that. If Iraq objected to it, which I don't know if they did, do you know? I don't know where Khamenei was. And if he was, assume he wasn't in Iran. Let's say he was in Iraq.
I'm pretty sure it was in Baghdad. I'm pretty sure. Maybe,
let's say if Iraq objected, I think there are questions about that. I mean, all I try to do is put myself the shoe on the other foot. Now, I'm not saying this is like a discredit, like, oh, this is it. Biden should immediately be removed. But the whole situation with Biden, this is what made the situation even worse. Biden ran on and immediately started to renegotiate the Iran deal and to send Iran money as soon as he gets in the office, while simultaneously bombing a third country, Syria, saying that the country that he's sending money to, Iran, has people in Syria that are attacking U.S. interests. So how could you, if you think that Iran is so evil that it requires you bombing a third country to take out Iran, how could you be suggesting giving them money? Like at that point, step one would be, instead of launching bombs, listen, Iran, you have people right now in Syria and we know they're attacking U.S. assets. You ain't getting this money till that stops. Wouldn't that be step one? You say the good shit we're giving you, we're going to stop. You don't say, well, here, we're going to keep giving you the good shit, but we're also going to bomb you in a third country. That to me was the sort of what made that situation uniquely shitty. With Trump bombing Syria, what made that situation uniquely shitty was that they admitted that it was 3 days after this alleged sarin gas attack, but there wasn't any investigation done. They just were like, oh, clearly Assad did this. And it's like, okay, well then when we see all these claims of IPCW that went there to investigate this and they're like, we don't think so, now what? Whoopsie? We just bombed a foreign country. And basically the excuse was given was, yeah, but Assad's a shitty guy. He's done shitty stuff in the past. True. But that doesn't mean you could just bomb them at whim based on a gut feeling, at least in my opinion.
That's what they're doing. That's what they're doing now. They're bombing the shit out of Syria. Turkey, US, and Iran.
It's shit. It's more nation building bullshit. It's the same sort of shit we saw in Libya. It's the same sort of shit we saw in Iraq. And I'm sort of tired of it. When does it ever pay off? It's constantly, the United States constantly does this shit. We haven't even gotten to discussions about how bad actors there are in Ukraine, the Tornado Battalion, the Azov Battalion, etc. And we're just sending all this shit that's not being audited. Hell, let's even say it's just weapons. What are we going to do 20 years from now when it's like, oh, well, it turns out that there were bad actors within Ukraine that got their hands on a bunch of U.S.-financed munitions, and now they have terror cells. So now we got to go back. And before you're like, well, that sounds like nonsense. That's exactly what Al-Qaeda was. Al-Qaeda was the Mujahideen that we financed in the 70s. Or I keep saying we. That the United States financed in the 70s so that it would give Russia their own Vietnam and Afghanistan. And we denied it
I
the
mean-
whole time. We said, no, we're not doing it. And then afterwards, they were like, yeah. And then they said, oh, by the way, now we have to pass the Patriot Act and take away your Fourth Amendment rights. And we have to go for a 20-year war in Afghanistan because we financed these people 20 years ago. Like, the unintended consequences of this shit seemed more often than not to be more negative.
Listen, I mean, is it it wasn't Bin Laden, the guy who was like 9/11 and sort of kicked off like the American sort of intervention period in Iraq? Wasn't he? He was Saudi, wasn't he? I'm pretty sure he was a Saudi guy.
Well,
he,
he was certainly, they were financed by the Saudis, right? Which we put a kibosh on that in the 9/11 investigations. All of a sudden, they didn't give a shit who financed it, which is absurd. Like, that wouldn't that be one of the first questions? Who logistically carried it out? Who financed it? Well, when they started to find out that the financing, the 9/11 Commission report, you could read it. When you start to read it, and they're like, "Oh, it turns out some of this financing was coming from Saudis." They're just like, "Well, never mind. We don't need to find out who financed it." Was Bin Laden specifically? What I remember about Bin Laden was he was wealthy. Did he come? I believe from Saudis. Probably someone saying in my chat that he was a billionaire CIA asset. Probably true. I'm sure that his family had something to do with the CIA. Nonetheless, specifically the Taliban and the Mujahideen, which he was able to step in and then take leadership role in forming some of it into Al-Qaeda, they received their military training and backing from the United States. So
well,
I don't think
I got a hot take for you with
Okay.
with that one. I'd say that the United States original funding of Al Qaeda and stuff, I would say completely worth it. And the reason why I say that is because, I understand that it's been horrible for us now, and it's come to bite us in the ass. But I'd say it's probably like one of the good ones. The original invasion of the Soviet Union into Afghanistan, they weren't winning there, and so they just decided to, from like what I've read, is just commit genocide. And there's like a toll of like over 1 million Afghanistan. I think this is off memory. There was over 1 million Afghanistanis like dead just from Russians just carpet bombing the entire place. So I while it clearly didn't end too well for us now. I would say, support at the time I would probably do that.
Well, at the time is one thing, but what are the consequences in retrospect?
Fall of the Soviet Union. That was
it
good
directly responsible?
It was partially.
Do you think if
I
we
mean,
wouldn't have funded the Mujahideen, the Soviets wouldn't have fell?
It was well, I mean, like, I don't know exactly like what was the exact sort of chain that led to the fall of the Soviet Union, but there was a couple of big ones, like they were incredibly exhausted from all the wars they were fighting. They had there was Chernobyl, and their financials, they were doing terrible.
Well, let's say that at 80%,
US and Saudis were waging war with the price of oil on them.
let's say there's an 80% chance, right? Like that was directly what led to the downfall of the Soviet Union. Is it worth it in the grand scheme? I don't know. You know what I, as an American, give a shit about? Me, my family, my rights. You know what I don't like? That we have a Patriot Act, that we have a surveillance state in this country that's basically used to treat me like an enemy in my own country. I don't like that. I could draw a direct line to the funding of the Mujahideen to that. There will be a never-ending war on terrorism and erosion of rights of the people in this country because we funded terrorists. By the way, we're funding those terrorists again. We're funding Al-Qaeda in Syria. We're allies as the State Department.
You're bombing Al-Qaeda in Syria now as well.
No. That's not entirely true, right?
Well, is it ISIS? No, they're bombing ISIS.
Right.
I think it's...
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Al-Nusra and Al-Qaeda were our allies against ISIS in Syria, right? And we even have documents from the State Department where they're saying Al-Qaeda is our ally in Syria. So back home, I can't get on an airplane without getting filled up. Even children can't, right? You can't have your emails are surveyed, your phone calls are surveyed, and all this because this one organization, Al-Qaeda, was so evil. They're such a threat to us that we have to erode those rights. But in Syria, we could finance them and be their allies. Same in Libya. There are allies in Libya. Not exactly Al-Qaeda, but Islamic terrorists, right? So it all of a sudden it gets like the idea. It's like if people were just honest, I could accept it to some extent. Yeah, we fund bloodthirsty, genocidal, religious fanatic terrorists because they're going after other people that we think are shitty people, and we say good. do it. And yeah, that probably means down the road, we're going to tell you, yep, now we got to go deal with these bloodthirsty religious fanatic terrorists that we just funded. We're going to have to deal with them militaristically because we funded them and we created them. At least there's honesty to that, but instead we're constantly told, noble, great people, we're fun. And I understand why they have to do that. Like, of course, it's not going to be a propaganda victory to admit the truth. But what I see constantly is blunder after blunder after blunder, and it's almost always at the expense of people in the countries that our intel agencies are claiming to care about, and then the people of the United States, and the people of the Western world in general. What? By the way, are you Australian or British? I'm so sorry I'm bad with the accents.
No, I am.
You're
I'm
Australian. Yes.
Australian.
So I don't know what the situation on Australia is, but look at the situation in Europe. Now I think you even see Starmer that's admitting in the UK, like, yeah, the open borders experiment didn't work. Well,
listen, as I said before, like I've almost never voted for the Progressive Party in Australia. I think our border policy, which is we turn back people come by boats into Australia from Indonesia and such, deadly trip. Lots of them. When we started to let through like one or two, when like some of the progressive parties came through, they came through in droves. It's just, I feel as if a strong immigration policy that, is done through like the UN or places, where we take people who we decide are good people, they're not a threat, and, done on humanitarian grounds. Good. All good for it. But, there are processes to do it for it. And it's not for them to just appear on our border and to accept them. So, as I could if you were to tell me that Europe's made a horrible blunder in with their immigration policies, I completely agree. You can't take in like hundreds of well, actually, we're democracies, so if you take in if we take in a whole bunch of people who don't reflect our values,
right,
we take in too much of them, that will be reflected in our government, and we'll only have that to sort of like to go.
It's the irony. It's the irony with progressives. It's like you keep importing people that are going to be more antithetical to much of your progressive agenda. Like if you bring a bunch of refugees, for example, from Syria, what do you think their feelings on LGBT treatment is?
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And you can see that, ironically, I don't know how much you know about this, but there's a huge Muslim community in Dearborn, Michigan. And the left loves this because they play the, sort of cultural Marxist game. So yeah, they're oppressed. The Muslims are oppressed. So they're on the left. They're Democrats. Only they ain't putting up with this LGBT shit. Nope.
Really?
And it was a big thing where like you saw the Muslim mayor of Dearborn came out and he refused to endorse Kamala. It was like, nope. And a lot of it's going to bite them in the ass, right? Because you brought a bunch of people in there that I'm not even saying, by the way, my guess is, I don't know. I'm not trying to besmirch the Muslims of Dearborn. Maybe they're more liberal than, say, Muslims in Syria or Afghanistan. I would assume that's, But nonetheless, they're probably going to be more conservative than the average Democrat. And it's like, okay, what happens, and the United States is a huge country, right? But like some of these European countries, they're not that big. And if you import 1 million people, that's a significant block. And it's like when they start voting for certain things, it might sound good when they're voting for things that you think the Conservative Party wants and they're voting against that. Oh, good. But what happens when they start saying like, yeah, I had this dude call in the other day. And he's like, this is his take. You're a Christian, Rob? Yeah. Well, you're a shitty Christian because you want limited government and you're libertarian adjacent. And instead, you should want your holy men to create all the laws. And there shouldn't be any law above them. So whatever church I go to, that should be the people that should be making the laws. And I was like, well, what religion are you? He's like, I'm Islamic. And I'm like, so you're okay with Sharia law? He hemmed and hawed about it, but basically he was like, whatever the majority church is, they should create the laws. And I was like, okay. But that would mean that if the majority in the United States became Muslim and thought that women shouldn't be allowed to walk unaccompanied without men, that would be the law. Yep. Like, you can't see how fucking crazy that gets, right? Like, it's like, no, that's a terrible idea. There need to be hedges on democracy. But in general, I get where you're coming from. And what I'm saying about this is, though, oftentimes what happens is, I think, now this is my opinion, but I think we have a bunch of leaders that don't give a shit about the people of the United States. They don't give a shit about the people of UK. They don't care about Afghanistan people. They don't care about Ukrainian people. They don't care about the Russian people. They care about making sure that their agenda and their power is entrenched and them and their allies and friends stay on top. They want basically tantamount to a neo-feudalism, that there are the haves and the have-nots. And they'll give the have-nots bread and circuses as long as you're not a thorn in their side. That's what I believe most of these powerful people in the world want. They want to entrench their system on top. They basically view themselves as a separate class of people. And the biggest stepping stone to that is developed countries and sort of the middle class in those countries. People that aren't totally reliant on the government. Because once you're totally reliant on the government, then you're willing to put up with their shit. This isn't just a right-wing belief, by the way. Like, postmodernists, who I despise, believe this shit too. Like, Michel Foucault calls it biopower. And basically, the dumb layman 10 IQ version of this, which I am, is if the government has the power to turn on the lights, the government also has the power to turn off the lights, right? And so when you rely on the government for your existence, well, then you better go along with the government. And so the biggest threat to that is, and interchange government with anybody that you're relying on, when you live at your parents' house, that's good for you because they provide for you. But when they say, hey man, you're going to be in by 8 o'clock, your ass better be in by 8 o'clock, right? Because they're paying the bills. It's the same. Yeah, and so these people then that actually have the power, they're the ones who create these shitty situations. They're like, yeah, fuck it. Let's keep Ukraine in a perpetual state of war. And then inevitably when refugees come flooding out of Ukraine, they go, well, we have to accept these refugees. We have to. Yeah, let's keep Syria in perpetual state of war. Well, we have to accept the Syrian refugees. And like you can even see it in countries like Libya. Gaddafi was begging the Western world. He's like, listen, these people that were in conflict with us in Libya, these aren't just citizens that are fed up with me. These are Islamic terrorists, many of them from outside of the country. And they're being financed by the West to engage in a war to overthrow me. And if they win, they're going to install such ridiculous laws in this country, it's going to make the country a hellhole. And that's exactly what happened. Libya went from having one of the highest literacy rates in sub-Saharan Africa and home ownership rates, etc. Not that Gaddafi was a good guy. Now there are open-air slave markets. And no one gives a shit. All the people in the Obama administration, the people in NATO that were supporting the noble revolutionaries under Gaddafi, where are they now? No one gives a shit about the people of Libya. Sorry, dude. Yeah, someone in my chat says that was Hillary Clinton. We came, we saw, he died. Yeah, how they killed, when she was asked about that, you know how they killed Gaddafi? They shoved a bayonet up his ass and then paraded him while they tortured him around the streets. Videotaped it all. That's the people in charge of our State Department. That's what they thought about it. We came, we saw, he died. Great. Awesome. Now what are we doing for the people of Libya? Not a goddamn thing. But we've created more refugees, which then go into more countries, and then we just move on. Well, now we're going to move on to Syria. Now we're going to move on to Ukraine. And it's this never-ending cycle.
I mean, I wouldn't, once again, I don't think Ukraine was I think Ukraine was...
It's different, you're right. It is different than Libya. That's certainly true. But it's the same people running the show, right? Like, in your heart of hearts, do you think that politicians in the UK, NATO, and the United States, do you think they're supporting Ukraine because they give a shit about the people of Ukraine? Or do you think they're supporting Ukraine because they see geopolitical strategy and attacking Russia in this way?
I think the Brits sort of like, have this, what was it? What was that gentleman's name? He had like he was like the mayor of London, and he had that really sort of strange hairstyle.
Why can't I think of his name? I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, so I think there is a sense of like I think it's very popular in the UK at least to be seen as supporting oppressed peoples on Europe's mainland. So I mean I'd agree with you. You're at least right in part. Certainly I think that is like a that would be in the decision making of any sort of leader as to support Ukraine based on.
But do you think if they had to decide that the people of Ukraine would be ravaged, but it would be a significant blow to Russia, or people of Ukraine wouldn't be ravaged near as much, but it would only be a minor blow to Russia. What would you think they would rather have? In other words, I think that their primary reason is because they see geopolitical value, not that there is an injustice being done to the Ukrainian people and we must help them. I don't think that it's from a place of benevolence. I think it's from a place of they see value for themselves and their allies. That's how I look at it. And if that means that every last damn Ukrainian needs to die for them to help achieve their goals, so be it. They'll be okay with it.
Listen, I don't think you're wrong. There is certainly
Johnson,
some people.
Boris Johnson was the guy, by the way.
Yeah,
It was right at the tip of my tongue, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Boris. So with Boris Johnson, I think it was it's been very popular in Britain to be seen as supporting the big bad on the mainland. So I would say some politicians, they are interested in supporting for the common folk. And I don't think you're wrong. I certainly think that there is definitely a degree of some people do sort of support Ukraine out of pure geopolitical ambitions and not sort of out of any sort of real care. But I don't think that is necessarily the case for everyone. I'm sure that once they don't live there, they can't really understand what Ukraine's going through. But I'm sure that Zelensky, when he gets on the phone and he sort of describes exactly how many Ukrainian cities have been turned to rubble by the Russians on this particular day, I'm sure there's. I wouldn't say it's completely it's not a completely their motives aren't completely selfless, but I'm sure you're not wrong. There is definitely a selfish aspect to this. That's why they're helping as well.
Yeah,
So,
I just think that if they do care about these people, then they do a poor job over and over again, like the people of Libya. But I don't know. That's where I'm at.
Well, listen, Libya is a horrible. I don't know enough about it. I wouldn't defend what happened in Libya. It sounds like an utter catastrophe for me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. That's just how I look. So I don't know. Again, there's no right answer in the sense that I'm not going to sit here and bullshit people and be like, oh, if the United States would have just been like, yeah, Russia, we're not going to send missiles to Ukraine anymore and blah, 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 that Russia would have been like, thank you. Now we won't do anything. Maybe not. But I just think that the status quo procedures, to me, there was this blood out, daggers out, get Russia at any cost during 4 years under Trump. Most of it led by the opposition because they were accusing Trump of being a puppet of Vladimir Putin. And I just think that when I was bringing up warnings, because I was debating people like Dylan Burns. I was like, you don't think that what we're doing in Syria right now is going to piss off Russia? You don't think that this might lead to consequences down the road? Nah, what could they do? Okay. And then when we see it occur, now that doesn't mean that I'm right that one A led to B directly, but it does seem to, at least I was thinking it'd be nice to not have a proxy war or an actual war amongst world powers. That'd be great. I'd like to avoid that if possible, and it just seemed like so many people were just flipping about it. No, we don't give a shit. Fuck Russia. Keep aggressing. Keep pushing. Push and push and push and push. And then, oh my God. It's like I don't know if you go to the bar, what do you call them in Australia? Pubs, bars, taverns?
Pubs, yeah.
Okay, you go to the pub. Have you ever seen this? I used to bartend, so I would see this. You'd see some woman, and she'd go up to some guy, and she'd be pushing him and slap him a couple times, 3-4 times, and then finally she'd slap him, and the dude just fucking haymakers her. Right? And everyone's like, oh my God. Now, I'm not saying that use of force, overwhelming force like that's necessarily justified, but no one gave a shit at the provocation. Everyone just sat there and was like, ha ha! And then, oh shit! When the reaction happens, right?
That's certainly true, but there is always a scenario where you can embolden someone by not taking the correct action at the start. For example, I would say that when Trump initially sent those weapons to Ukraine, I would say that is one of Trump's biggest wins in my eyes. I think that that helping Ukraine sort of defend from the they didn't lose in 3 days like everyone was expecting them to, and Trump certainly had some. I'm no Trump fan. We've gone over this when we were doing stars spoke. But I'm not gonna take away from
Well,
I'm not gonna give him
let me
props
ask
when he
you.
does
Maybe
well.
you know more about this than me. Those weapons that he sent were Javelin missiles. So I don't know. Two things I don't know. Maybe you know this. One, were there other weapons that were being sent prior to that from the Obama administration and the Trump administration? Because I know Obama didn't send the Javelins.
I'm pretty sure he sent javelins and stingers, and I'm not sure if there was weapons sent prior to him, but I know that the the first couple of assaults on Kiev and stuff were like heavily. They had like a lot of armor in them, and it was at least unclear at the commentary at the time whether they could have like held that out if they weren't sort of like in it. Like there was so many videos online of like with Ukrainians with like stingers and the anti-tank missiles as well from the Americans. Like there was so many videos online of Ukrainians taking out Russian tanks at the time.
Maybe that was the second question I
think
had.
that helped.
Yeah, that was the second question.
That.
How much did because I've heard so the Stingers are designed for counter air, I believe. The Javelins are counter tanks. The Air Force I don't know about, but I know that I've heard a lot that the big, believe it or not, the big stopping of the Russian tanks had more to do with weather and poor sort of planning.
Well, yes,
but the Javelins certainly could have helped. I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and bullshit. Could it have been that had those Javelins not be there, that Russia was able to advance their tank forces much faster and it would have avoided some of the bad outcomes of the war? Maybe that's the case. I just don't know. But I'm not willing to accept at face value. Well, thank God we sent those Javelins. That's what kept Ukraine in the fight as long as possible. It may have saved some Ukrainian lives. I just don't know. Maybe it did. Maybe it didn't. I'm just fully admitting. I know I hear the narrative all the time. Thank God Trump sent those, or else Ukraine would have been wiped out. I don't know that that's true. It may be though. I don't know.
It seems the logical sort of conclusion to me. I know that before that Ukraine was operating a lot on its old Soviet stockpile. I'm not sure. Maybe they did have a ton of anti-tank there as well, but I guess that's possible. But I mean, it seems very well timed by Trump at least when those shipments came in.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, I honestly don't think I have as much of a problem with the Javelins as I do with the Ukraine thing. For me, the demonization of Russia that occurred for the 4 years under Trump, right? With it, even as he took aggressive postures like sending those Javelins and other things that we were continually told in this country that, oh, he's sucking up to Putin, et cetera, et cetera. It just seems that it puts you on the path to conflict inevitably. I mean, to the point where you're treating Russia as hostile so much so that you're sending countries weapons to fight Russia. You're bombing their allies and shit like that. The opposition party in this country is like, not enough, must go further. And then the opposition party comes into power. To me, it's like, I'm not surprised that it ends up in direct conflict with Russia. And for me, it's just like, I see that, I don't know. I see that there haven't been efforts to try to have a peaceful resolution. And I'm sick and tired of being told in this country that I have to give a shit more about financing wars around the world. Because trust me, bro, it's good for us and it'll all end up positive. Ignore that Afghanistan shit. Ignore that Libya shit. Ignore that Iraq shit. This time, it'll all be better for us in the long run. Trust me, bro. Oh, by the way, sorry that your inflation's going up massively. And sorry that we don't give a shit about the people in Maui with the fires, or the people in Helene with the floods, or the people in Palestine, Ohio with the train wreck. Sorry about that, bro. We're more involved in Ukraine. Ukraine's where it's at. Where's your flag on your lapel, you piece of shit? You're a stooge of Vladimir Putin? We need to censor disinformation online. I'm tired of it. I just am. And so for me, I think we need a resolution there. I don't know what happens if we have that resolution and then the policies are violated, the terms of that resolution are violated. I guess we cross that bridge when we can, but the perpetual escalation seems to be in strategic error. I'll give you a final word. I have to be out by 12:30, so I only got 2 minutes.
No, that's fine. Thank you for keeping me on. I guess, if I had to say anything, once again, I'll harp on. Trump sent those weapons. I think that was a big win. I think some of the best stuff of the Trump presidency was some of the foreign stuff. He sanctioned China. That's very good. I don't think anyone else would have done that. I don't think I think Trump's sending weapons to Ukraine was well timed. I would say that that the forces aligned against the US are many, and they want to tear apart the system as we have it and get rid of our ability to trade and be free, and and they want to sort of divide us into sections where of influence, where or the Chinese have sway over this thing, or the Russians have sway over this particular area. I'm against that. I think the Americans have done a pretty good job. You rock. Thank you, Mr. Rob. I appreciate you, buddy.
Yeah, no problem. It's great talking. For those that don't know, Leader was the one who put together the poker game that I played in, and I will do that again. It's just to explain to you, Leader, I do block shifts, so every other week I go in Saturday, then Sunday, and when I'm at work, I could sometimes stream when I'm off the clock, but I can't do things like that because I can only use my phone, and I hesitate to set up any collaborations of any sort because anything could happen when I'm at work at a healthcare home. Even though I'm off the clock, let's say a fire alarm goes off or my client gets sick. So I don't like to set up collaborations when I'm at work because I don't want to waste other people's time if I have to back out. So that's the only reason I couldn't join this Saturday or Sunday. So
I appreciate it anyway. Thanks. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you, Leader. Hopefully we top soon. And yeah, it was great having you on. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take it easy. All right. So sorry to the other guests that came on. I saw people were bumping in and out. But unfortunately, I do have to go today. So we'll get to more callers here on another day. But yeah, I mean, my feelings in general on the Russia thing, I've made him, Crazy for Coke's like, when will we stop pretending Russia isn't our adversary? Cool, Russia's our adversary. Let's go to war, right? Oh, no, let's leave Ukrainians die for it? Yes, Russia's our adversary. So's China. So's Iran. And? So? China's our adversary, and we elected the guy whose son worked for the spy chief of China and sent a bunch of money to the Biden family. When are we going to stop pretending China's not our adversary? Russia's our adversary, and Obama said the Cold War called they want their foreign policy back. Hillary Clinton, her husband went and personally spoke with Vladimir Putin, then was given $500 million by a Russian state-owned bank, to which then the Uranium One deal that Hillary Clinton's office signed off on, selling 20% of American uranium to our adversary Russia, occurred. Where were the Democrats and the media that scream Russia, Russia, Russia? Where were they when that occurred? That's weird. I don't remember that. So, yeah, not buying it. Not buying that me not wanting never-ending war or continuing saber-rattling and political aggression means that I'm spreading Vladimir Putin's talking points. Iran's our adversary. They hacked Trump. Does that mean that the people that are spreading the talking points against Trump are spreading Iranian talking points? Is that what they're doing? When are we going to stop pretending Iran's not our adversary? I said $500,000, I think, not $500 million. $500,000 is what Bill Clinton got paid. So, all right. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to head out. I got some stuff to do tonight. But fun Christmas stuff. I am going to try to put up a couple shorts that I'll record later this evening. Just going to come up with an idea. I got some ideas. I had things to talk about other than that today, believe it or not. I was going to talk about the Duke Lacrosse, the woman that accused those Duke Lacrosse people like 18 years ago, admitted that she made it all up. Remember when the whole national media jumped on that, how they were privileged white kids in a frat that assaulted this poor, innocent black woman. All a lie. Nothing's wrong with trying to screw over our adversaries. Doing so at the cost of 1 million Ukrainians might be a bad idea. We should screw over Russia. We should increase energy exportation, particularly to Europe. Cool with that. It doesn't mean that we should be militaristically antagonistic. Then there was another story I wanted to cover. I can't remember what it was, but oh well. Maybe I'll do a short on it. Oh, the idea that now they're saying the Secret Service guy had 4 shots at the second Trump assassin and missed. So one of the shorts I'm going to put up today is like, I guess the lesson learned is the most trained protective detail in the history of the world, the U.S. Secret Service. Their only weakness is if you're a would-be shooter that's feet away, they can't get you, and God forbid you be on a sloped roof. You're off limits then. Sorry, our Secret Service just can't handle that. What a fucking joke. All right, guys, thanks so much. I appreciate it. Special call thanks to Leader. He was game. I know I was poking the bear there a little. I like Leader. I think he's a good guy, and I don't think he's a shithead that wants people to, I sincerely believe that he doesn't want any of these people to die or anything like that. He's not one of these assholes that's like, oh, fuck these Russians, I hope all of them die or anything like that. So I enjoyed the call with him. Sorry I didn't get to everyone. Thank you all that stay here. I hope the members on YouTube enjoy the new emojis. Remember, if you have new ideas for emojis, send them to me on my Discord. And I'll be streaming probably Monday night will be the next live stream. So look for that. But remember, I'll be putting shorts out on YouTube and all other platforms daily. So thanks so much, everyone. We'll talk to you all soon. As always, have a good one.